Hello and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm really looking forward to hosting Martin Gonzalvez. Martin is a print and play YouTuber, an admin of a 13,000 member print and play hideaway Facebook group, co-admin of the 8,000 member print and play subreddit, host of the monthly print and play crafting geek list on Board Game Geek. I think you can tell a theme here. He's rethemed nearly 30 games and has designed or co-designed 3 free print and play games available from Board Game Geek. Outside of board gaming, Martin is an instructional designer who designs and delivers technical and management training courses. So Martin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the wonders of print and play and also your background as a designer and how you got into it and also just your perspective as a game designer, the game that you brought to the figurative desert island is the Lost Ruins of Arnak. Mm-hmm. Tell me about it. First off, what is it?
Sure. So the Lost Ruins of Arnak came out in 2020, I believe. It's designed by Min and Elwin. That's how they've designated themselves on Board Game Geek. Yeah. And it's published by CZE, Czech. I don't know the full name of the publishing company. But anyway, so Lost Ruins of Arnak is a medium weight. And when I say weight, I'm using the Board Game Geek 1 to 5 weight complexity, with 1 being super light and 5 being incredibly heavy. So it sits somewhere around like 2.7 or 2.8. So right there in the middle. It's a medium weight worker placement game, essentially. And the theme is, you are kind of adventurers and explorers. You are kind of like Indiana Jones-ish. And you've gone to this place called Arnak. It's this island, it's a mysterious island where it's unexplored. And so you have to kind of just explore by placing your workers in areas and then, getting through some challenges and then doing some quests and tasks. As that's going on, so you're like progressing deeper and deeper into the island, and things are getting more challenging and costing more, and et cetera, using more resources, because it's, one of the main mechanisms is resource gathering and resource conversion. On the kind of right side of the board, you have a separate version of your team, your group, who are trying to get inside this temple. And the deeper they get into the temple, the more kind of hidden knowledge they discover. And that translates to kind of more resources for, your main efforts. And so you're trying to do 2 things at the same time. Basically, at a high level, you're trying to go up this temple and get to the top, or get to the center. And the first one, it's a race. So the first player to do it gets the most points. Of course, as a Euro game, you're like, your goal is to get the most points, right? And then you're also trying to on the main part of the board, you're trying to explore further into this island. You're like I said, you're meeting temple guardians, and then you have to defeat them. And so the theming is very, I find it very compelling, and it's one of those rare kind of Euro style worker placement games where, and I don't know if you've heard this, but a lot of Euros have the kind of pejorative acronym of JASE, or JACE, just another soulless Euro. And it's kind of like alluding to the fact that many Euros are kind of all about the mechanics, and then the theme is almost pasted on or irrelevant. And for me, and certainly I've played my fair share of games that are like that, where it's like the theme could be anything, but it's really all about the mechanisms and the optimization and so on and so forth, right? But me, as a thematic gamer, and I think we'll get to it later, I started my board gaming journey as a thematic gamer, American-style gamer, if you will. I really go for games that are a balance now of the kind of the theme and the mechanism, and that they blend well with each other, they inform each other. And I think Lost Ruins of Arnak does that really, really nicely. So yeah, that's as brief of an overview as I can make of Lost Ruins of Arnak.
It's fantastic. So as you say, it's a worker placement game. There's it's a medium difficulty. There is this element of relevance of theme. Do you find like what's the most special about it? Is it the dynamic approach to or I guess relevant approach to mechanics, or do you identify mostly with the theme?
That's a great question. My kind of love affair with Lost Ruins of Arnak is I think I think we have to start with when it was announced and before it was released, because it was announced many months or even up to a year prior to it was actually released. And then when it was released, it became so popular that you couldn't really get a copy of it for a few months. It would sell out. And so all this stuff. So that was all going on around the 2020 timeframe. And so when I first heard of it, there was just something about it that's like, I have to have this game. And it kind of also coincided with the kind of point in my board gaming journey where I was buying everything. I was deeply embedded inside the kind of Kickstarter, board game, social media groups, Twitter, like all that stuff, that whole ecosystem. And so it's like, you're not even realizing it, but like you're just reading more and more about games and YouTube videos and all this stuff, and just learning more. And you're plugged into the BGG hotness, and you could ask me, and I could tell you what was a top 10 on any given day without even looking at that's how deep I was into it. And Lost Ruins of Arnak was one of those where it's like, wow, yeah, I really wanted it. So like there was this high level of expectation, and then I wasn't able to get a copy when it first came out, and then I was like, being a real pain on the social media. It's like I was putting out memes of like, oh no, another day without Lost Ruins of Arnak, and just some, kind of like funny, haha, but also kind of wistful posts about like, oh, I can't get my hands on a copy, and et cetera, et cetera. So much so, I made so many memes about it that I would post on social media that Min and Elwin themselves got wind of some of the memes and asked me to share with them, like a whole zip compressed file of like an archive of all the memes. And then they were just like, this is hilarious. Thank you so much for doing this. Because what I was doing was I was showing love for their work. Right. And so it's kind of I thought it was a wholesome thing. I don't know about, of course, of social media, like, you'll have as many detractors as promoters of the stuff that you do. And I'm not sure everybody was appreciative of like me just like pining after Lost Ruins of Arnak. So there was that whole period prior to its release. And then I finally got a copy. Someone reached out to me like on private message, like a fellow board gamer, and said, hey, I'm willing to sell you this brand new, I think it's still in shrink copy, for a decent price. And I'm like, are you sure? Because it was like really, in demand at that time. And they said, yeah. And so I'm like, and that's how I was able to finally get my own copy. And so then, of course, so many posts from me, just triumphantly exulting. I got a copy. Here it is. And then I started playing it. And it was just like one of those rare things. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that with a game before, where the expectation matched the level of anticipation. And it really came at the right time for me, because my evolution had been with these, started out like a few years with American style, dice chuckers, lots of randomness, lots of theme, all that stuff. And then I didn't like, what are Euro games? I don't even know. Those are strange. Those are like people who like sit quiet for 3.5 hours and play a game and don't interact and whatever. Like I didn't know what it was all about. And then until I finally, Lost Ruins of Arnak was one of the first ones that I played, and I'm like, whoa, because as you're playing it, well, as I'm playing it, there's this kind of contemplative, calming quality of it, where you're just basically thinking about, okay, I need to get this thing, but I don't have all the resources for it. But then there's all these other places on the board where I could potentially trade or convert what I have with what I don't have. But then if I do, and then you're starting to think about like these combo chains in your head, and it's not like it trains your brain to think in a different way, right? It's not just like I need to roll these dice and I need to get these many successes, et cetera, et cetera. But without even realizing it, you're just starting to think about these combo chains. And that's one of the beauty of this game design, is that it really kind of makes use of combos and enables different combos and like different things that crop up at different points in the game. And it's only 5 rounds of play. It's a pretty short game, and yet you get into all of these like crazy situations because of the round structure. And a lot of Euros share this. I've come to understand, but this was my first experience with it, where it's like each round you only have 2 workers to play, so it's pretty restrictive, right? But so those are your 2 main actions, but then you have an unlimited number of free actions, right? So free actions could be, converting a resource, or using one of your because during during the game you acquire these like helpers, these guides, and they have has an ability. So you can use an ability, a guide ability for free, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing leads to another. And then in your head, you're like, okay, I've already got a chain, but if I change the order a little bit, then this different thing happens. And then you start thinking about multiple chains and multiple pathways. You know what I mean? So, and the whole point of, especially, this was at the height of the pandemic, right? And so what I needed was something to take my mind off of this dystopian nightmare that the world had become. And so for those couple of hours that I'd be playing Lost Ruins of Arnak, I'd just be thinking about like different combo chains and ways to do things in the game and get a higher score. And it would completely enthrall me. And then I would just like the world would vanish. And very rarely do I have that experience with a game. And by the way, this is mostly solo. I should clarify that I'm mostly a solo gamer. So it's even harder to achieve complete immersion as a solo gamer because, most of the time there's always this like, voice in my head going, oh yeah, no, that sucks. Yeah, that's dumb. This is just a game I'm playing, like you're not in it. But Lost Ruins of Arnak for a long time just effortlessly did that for me. And you know what? If you ask me right now, I can't even explain to you why. Like, objectively speaking, it's not really that different from like a dozen other midweight Euros that I could now, mention to you as I look over these shelves around me.
Yeah.
Lost Ruins of Arnak also opened the floodgates to me saying, wow, this is what a midweight Euro is like. There must be more out there. Let me find them all and buy them all. And then I did. And as it turns out, none of them have the staying power for me as Lost Ruins of Arnak. So yeah, pretty long, but that kind of captures.
I love it.
It's a crazy and there's an X factor there, but really for me it comes down to calming, soothing, drawing me in, keeping me fully engaged. It's at the right level of complexity, the right mechanics that are engaging but not too complicated, and the right amount of theme. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, like board game comfort food.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and I do, and it's the thing where, because I've gone through and most board gamers go through ebbs and flows, right? Where sometimes you're into it and blah blah blah, and then sometimes you don't play for weeks or months at a time. And I've certainly had my share. And then I know kind of consistently over the years, Lost Ruins of Arnak is the one that can get me out of a slump. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I mean, what an endorsement. Although I have to say, if you had to wait for someone to message you about a copy and you were already in touch with the designers,
I wasn't yet.
You weren't yet. Yeah. I was about to say, they couldn't throw you a bone.
I know. Maybe if they'd known about how I was promoting their game at the time, maybe they would have just like, we'll take pity on you, you poor man. Here's a free copy.
So I mean, since that point, well, I guess let's come back to Lost Ruins of Arnak in terms of the mechanics. I'd be keen to understand how it's influenced your mechanic design, or maybe just your discovery of Euros or experience with them. But you came to game design in a way that at least not as many people that I've met have, and that's kind of through the BGG game design contests and retheming of games and so I'd love to understand a little bit, like, how did you start getting involved with these contests, and at what point did it shift from just you enjoying games to you saying, oh, maybe I could just design one?
Yeah, again, a really great question. So the deeper I got into the board gaming rabbit hole and all its different manifestations, the more time I was spending on Board Game Geek, and Board Game Geek, especially for your listeners, you basically fall into different camps in terms of how you regard Board Game Geek. And most people are like, "Ew, that website is stuck in the '90s.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. It's so confusing. I don't want to have anything to do with it." Or and in the middle, you just have like, well, I just check the hotness, or I just check the top game section, or if there's a specific game, I'll search for it, I'll Google it, and then if a BGG link for that game pops up, but I don't like, I'm not inside of it. I don't like do things with it, etc.
Default to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that I went through that evolution, and then eventually I got into if you're a nerd and you and you like to geek out and figure out how Board Game Geek really works, because it's true, it's stuck in the '90s. They've tried to modernize the interface, and it's kind of like a patchwork, but still, like it's hard to find things, blah blah blah. But if you figure it out, you can do stuff. So I began to explore all the different nooks and crannies. It's just jammed away with all these dozens or hundreds of micro communities inside of Board Game Geek. And that's how I stumbled upon the print and play community and the solo gaming community and, all these things. And so it's part of because the solo gaming community in Board Game Geek is one of the biggest guilds, if not the biggest single guild, like over 30,000 people. And I noticed that some of them were playing these like games I'd never heard of, games that were still works in progress. And I'm like, how are they getting access to these things? And then so I dug into that more, and I'm like, oh, every year there are design contests. There are print and play game design contests that happen all throughout the year. And some of them are more regular than others, but one of the most stable and ones that have been going on continuously since, I don't know, like the early 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, is the Solitaire Print and Play Game Design Contest. And I learned about it in like early 2018. And then, I was like, when is it going to start? What is it going to do? And then in my head, I'm like, do I even, because at that point I was just a player, right? And I'm just like, I can't design a game. I don't know anything about game design. But then I was reading some of the work in progress threads there, and there were a lot of people just like me. They're like, I don't know anything about game design, but I've got this idea. And it seemed to be a fairly welcoming and kind of diverse community of people who would just like, we're all in the same boat. Some of us are very amateur. Some of us have a little bit of experience, but we are going to support each other. We're going to help each other. And if you open up a work in progress thread here, some of us are going to read your rules and help you edit your rules. Some of us are going to play test your game, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just within this kind of supportive environment that I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And the cleaner was my my first idea. I was kind of like intrigued by this idea of, if you remember the movie Pulp Fiction, Harvey Keitel plays a character called the Wolf, right? And he's the guy that you call if if a mess has been made in the terms of like people dying, blood everywhere. So it was just like really macabre, really gruesome idea. But I'm like, I want to play as the Wolf. I think that would be really cool, And so like, but I had no artistic talent to speak of. So there I was trying to figure out, and I was thinking about like vaguely the mechanisms of, what the heck was that game? The game escapes me now, but it was basically just cube pushing. It's like you have these number of cubes, different colors of cubes, and then the different colors correspond to different values of cubes. And then you can start to convert and exchange, like if you have 4 yellow cubes, you could exchange them for a purple cube, and the purple cube is 1 cube that costs more, and so on and so forth. And I was just like playing around with that idea of like cube conversion. I didn't even know that I was like messing around with a little bit of Euro mechanics, because I wasn't playing Euros in at the time. And
You were
then
inventing them yourself.
I was, yeah. But basically the concept of the game was, so you're called in, there's a crime scene, there's a mess, there's a dead body, you have X amount of time, you have 1 hour, 60 minutes to clean as much of it up before the cops show up. Was the idea of the game. And you have these cards that represent your various tools. And then printed on the cards are die roll results that if you get, you can activate that tool to that level of efficiency. And then based on that, like that would enable you to get cubes and then place them on tiles on this board. Each tile represented an area where there was DNA. And so if you could complete the tile recipe or requirement for each tile, then you could remove that tile from the board, meaning you had successfully cleaned all the DNA in that section of the board. There was an overhead view of the crime scene, and there's a dead body there. And obviously the hardest DNA to remove is the dead body. But then there were just like other areas where there had been blood spatter or whatever, where those were like they'd be hidden, whatever. And then you wouldn't. So the concept of the design is, the tension is, you never have enough time to clean everything. So when the cops show up, because that was the key, is the cops will show up at the end of the game. You're gone. Well, there was another one, was like, you have to make sure you leave the premises before the cops show up. So you have to like judge at what point do I have to leave and say I can't clean anymore. And then the cops will show up, and then the cops have mechanisms, and it was all AI, where they're going to check each area of the crime scene, and there's a chance that they could discover any DNA that you had left uncleaned, right? So those were kind of the decision space of this game design. And I really loved it. And along the way, while I was inside of this contest, well, the contest runs for months. It runs from like June to October. I think I mentioned this when you and I were speaking prior, in preparation for this podcast. A really, really talented graphic designer named Doc Janine Viglietti had kind of seen my design, gotten an interest in it, and then had like given a sample of how they would redo the graphics, because my graphics were really bad, really, really amateurish.
Prototypes.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And I was so green. I'm like, I didn't understand that this is basically Janine saying, I want to be involved. I want to help you out for free. Just that was the ethos, right? So that's how I learned. And so Janine eventually her role expanded to not just graphics work, which was amazing, by the way, way more than I deserved, way more than that initial game design deserved. But also started helping out with mechanisms, with cards, with new mechanics, with theme and dialogue and this stuff, and became eventually my co-designer on the project. And it was really an amazing experience working together on that thing. And so I felt like my initial game design experience was like a crash course where I went from, I have no idea what I'm doing, to I've gone through 8 revisions of my rule book. It was bloody, by the way. The blood, as game designers will probably tell you, the bloodiest part and the most challenging part is writing and revising the rule book. To a game that was functional, and I think I mentioned it like so that was 2018, and then like if you fast forward, like during the pandemic, Shut Up and Sit Down did a feature on like what they called their top 10 print and play games, and they mentioned the cleaner. But they mentioned it in the context of, this is a really, really interesting idea for a game. The game itself, the mechanism, is not very good. And it wasn't. I didn't even take offense to that, because it was a random, RNG fest. It was like, if you didn't get the die roll, this precise die roll you're looking for, you could not use this card in your hand. It was not great game design. But I learned, and then I tried, that was part of my journey that I, like down the road. I tried different things, but ultimately, yeah. So the board, and that's just one contest, by the way, the solitaire. They have the 9-card contest. They have the nano game contest. They've got the 1-card game design contest. They've got the 2-player contest. They have the roll and write contest. They have a bunch of different BGG game design contests that are kind of going on. Any given moment in time, they've got 1 or 2 contests going on. In fact, the 2024 solo design contest is coming up onto its kind of final phases this October. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Board Game Geek design contests.
And also, it's not just you're a fan of of participating in the contest, but it seems like you also have a keen interest in bringing other people together and providing places for folks who are enthusiastic, especially around print and play. I mean, your Facebook group is incredibly popular, but it's not only popular, but you're incredibly active, and you're a good steward, of the community. So it's clear that like this middle zone between designer and player, it feels like that line is maybe a little bit blurred in your mind, or it could be.
Yeah, I think at this point, the way I think of myself is most of the time, like my bedrock identity is I am this kind of steward of the print and play community, like you said. And I feel that responsibility. It's kind of changed how I behave. You know what I mean? Like there were things, if you roll back a few years, there were things that I felt myself okay to do because I didn't see myself as kind of like this role model or this, someone who represents a community to the rest of board gaming. But now I do, and so that kind of changes how I show up and how I interact in these spaces. I always feel this responsibility to kind of be a role model and kind of show people there are a great many people within the print and play community who are engaged and interested in just good things about print and play. To kind of counteract a perception that has persisted over the years, with people from the outside looking in that, oh, print and play is just a way to pirate games, right? Print and play is just a way to enable folks making their own bootleg copies of games that, they make for free and they don't pay the publisher and the designer and blah, blah, blah. And from the very beginning, my involvement and the reason why I set up these print and play kind of spaces is to counteract that and to be very intentional about that and to show that no, there are people in the print and play community, most of us, who love to play games, love to experiment with unreleased games, because that's what a lot of those games that we were playing in the design contests, some of them were picked up by publishers and then were released and then became quite successful. John Keane, a New Zealand-based designer, he did Black Sonata. Let's see, what are some of his other published? It's hard for me at this point. Ask me before the pandemic, I was kind of like had this eidetic memory about these things, like, oh yeah, John Keane, and then rattle off half a dozen of his designs. Since the pandemic, it's become a little bit more challenging. Side Room Games is a publisher that has kind of specialized in kind of every year they look at the games that are in that contest and then select the ones that they think have a chance to go out and Kickstarter and become a commercial success, and they've had a pretty good instinct for that. But yeah, I confess that I'm kind of like losing the thread of why I started on this in the first place. You were talking about my involvement in the print and play community. So so there's me as the steward, right, and then me as the rethemer, because that's something that I've been doing. I started doing. It's like the evolution from like I craft print and play games to wouldn't it be cool if like this game is cool, but like wouldn't it be cool if it had a different theme that I'm more tuned into? And then I started kind of experimenting with that. I think my very first retheme back in 2018, 2019 was there was a print and play game which was like a deck builder, a solo deck builder that used a standard deck of cards. It was called Card Capture, and it was designed by a guy named Lucas Gentry. And I said, well, it's a standard deck of cards. I mean, like the deck building mechanisms are cool, but at the end of the day, it's a standard deck of cards. Like, wouldn't it be great if this thing had a little bit more thematic interest? And so I'm like, well, I really am a fan of this old video game series called here we go again. It's like from the 90s, and it's a real-time strategy, Advance Wars, if you've ever heard of it. And I'm like, so I took the Advance Wars kind of pixel art theme and I imposed it on this solo deck building game that Lucas had designed. And then that was my first project. And I didn't know anything. Like Lucas was happy, but I didn't know like what are the rights about taking these like pixel art graphics of this video game from the internet, and I don't even know who the developer was. And it came out on Nintendo platforms, and Nintendo was famously very litigious. I'm like, oh, I kept it to myself. But that eventually, now I said, like, I've made about 28 to 30 different rethemes, and along the way, I've kind of like asked permission from the game designer. So one of my craziest retheme ideas was, I like the game Wingspan, and I like birds, but I really think Wingspan would be cooler if you weren't collecting birds, but board games. How meta is that? Like, it's a board game about collecting board games, and there's a Wingspan card. Like, how many layers of meta is that in there? And so, like, good. I was off and running, and I'm like, I'm gonna retheme Wingspan. 180 cards had to, in the base game, had to be rethemed to board games, art, card effects, and flavor text. And I did it. It took me almost 6 months, which is insane. It's a free project. I'm not, nobody's paying me to do this stuff. But then I'm like, I want to share this. I want to share this project. So I reached out to Jamie Stegmaier. And this is not the first time I've reached out to Jamie Stegmaier. And to Jamie's credit, every time I've reached out to him with one of my harebrained ideas, he has always been very gracious and very supportive. And so I said, Jamie, I retheme Wingspan. I apologize to you and to Elizabeth Hargrave. Can I share it as a forever free print and play? And Jamie immediately was like, yeah, Martin, absolutely. No, that's an incredible thing. You can share it as a free print and play. And he just gave some kind of like restrictions about like the legalities of it. Like, this is not an official Stonemaier Games product, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And he allowed me to post it. And I think Jamie very wisely realized that there's very, very few people in this world who would actually craft that free print and play game. Me and other people that I can count on the fingers of one hand. Just because it's such a huge print and play project and insane. But those are the types of, kind of insane projects that I've been getting into in my retheming. But then, the retheming, and then the retheming was a deep dive into thinking about, like, what is this game made of? How does it tick? What are starting to think about mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. And then that, led me to eventually thinking that I would design my own games and then have my own design thoughts and et cetera, et cetera. So that was the evolution. But yeah, at any given moment, I freely code switch between all these different identities of who I am. And so, yeah, but at heart, as you can see from my bio, it's mainly try to be the steward of the print and play community.
You've been designing games now for a little while. And obviously, as you say, it's steward for the print and play community, but, Cleaner, as an example, has a lot of love on Board Game Geek and in the wider community. But you've never published anything, and so why not?
Yeah.
Why haven't you taken either any games that you've developed or taken a concept to either a publisher or thought about crowdfunding yourself?
Yeah, I think it's fear. Lack of confidence. I know it's funny. It's funny to say, like when you read my kind of effusive bio with all these things that I'm involved with, right? But you'll notice that none of them are money-making ventures.
Sure. Yeah.
And that kind of like speaks to, just something about me as a person. It's like, I'm not entrepreneurial at all. I have to be pushed to be entrepreneurial. I even hate to sell things and ask people for money. I don't know if it's just some sort of deep-seated thing where it's like, even the idea of setting a fair price for something that I'm reselling. There's a part of me that's like, is that too much? Maybe I should just sell it, for no profit or whatever. It's just deeply ingrained in my psyche, and to a fault. And also that extends to my career, where I've always worked for a company. I've never just kind of struck out on my own. You know what I mean? And so thinking about designing a game and then putting it out there, either pitching it to a publisher or going the crowdfunding route, seems a little bit like striking out on my own, and that's terrifying to me. I've always said to myself, well, this is I have a day job. I have a day job, so I don't need to try to make money from my game design efforts. So that kind of in my head frees me, but also prevents me. It frees me to just like do these things in my spare time, but it also prevents me from thinking about these things from a strategic and the end goal here is I want to get it on shelves. I want to sell it. I want to publish it, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? And also there's another part of me where it's like, I'm just an amateur game designer. I don't really think I'm good enough as a game designer. My ideas aren't good enough. You know what I mean? So I guess what is that? That's imposter syndrome, right?
Imposter syndrome. Yep.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you're saying a lot of this stuff because I don't know. I don't know if a huge number of game designers. I know a few, but most of them that I've talked to, if you talk about like, do you do this for the money, or it's that it usually results in a giant amount of laughter. Like,
Right.
no, if
Yeah.
I wanted to make money, I would do something else.
I know.
And so it's just really interesting to hear because, like, I guess I hear a little bit of myself in what you're saying, but slightly different. Like, I've never pitched to a publisher, because I'm assuming that charitably they won't get me, but honestly, they'll see that I'm a fraud and that I'm terrible. So I think I totally hear that, which is why we're doing a crowdfund on ours, and it is incredibly stressful and nerve-wracking and terrifying. But we're trying the thing. If the thing doesn't work, oh well, we'll feel bad, but we'll move on. But I feel like what is it? Marty's dad in Back to the Future.
Right.
I don't think I could take that kind of a rejection.
I know.
But it's just interesting because like I also know quite a few that are brave enough to pitch to publishers, and they also have day jobs. So I totally identify with what you're saying. It's just my vocabulary is slightly different, I guess.
Yeah. No. And yeah. So it's one of those things, right? Where it's like,
Do you need someone to ask you?
do I need someone to ask me?
Like, do you need someone like, do you need like Jamie Stegmaier to be like, hey Martin, I just saw your post about this. I think it'd be a cool game for us to publish. Is that what you'd need?
Well, heck, if he did, the other thing about me is I'm a people pleaser. So if someone that I look up to asked me, that would be the thing that would cause me to work my hardest to be able to please them and not want to fail them. And then that would cause a heck of a lot more stress. And maybe I'd start neglecting my day job. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, yes. It would be a thrill if someone acknowledged the work that I've been doing to the point where they ask me. But then there's that voice in my head that's like, no, they're never going to ask me. Come on.
Yeah.
Get real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. It's funny that they never do until they do.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, and also I don't know, reflecting back, just, you clearly just are doing what you love and people see that in a very authentic way. I don't think you get to large, Facebook audiences and Reddit audiences and just earned respect in communities like BGG. If you aren't actually passionate about it, or you're just trying to do it as a money-making thing. The only other people that have the kind of impact that you might have are maybe those who take it far more seriously as a business, as a money-making thing, and then that's just not, you can kind of tell, you can kind of see that. So yeah,
it's interesting. And over the years, people have, made very natural kind of suggestions to them in their heads. It's like, hey, Martin, this print and play thing, like we have X number of thousands of members. Like if you decided to put up a real world convention, I'm sure you could get several hundred people out of those thousands to get together. Just figure out, what would make it worth their time to attend this convention. And immediately when I hear something like that, I'm like, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
I need somebody to, if that's going to happen, I need somebody there who knows what they're doing.
Someone
You know
else.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I need an
Totally.
adult. I need an adult.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating because a lot of what you're saying is very similar to other designers that I've interviewed. And that fear, it's not necessarily fear of failure; it's also fear of success as well,
Hmm.
which is a slightly different beast. It's
Right?
like,
Yeah,
well,
no,
I'm
it's,
actually quite comfortable right now where I am, even if it's not necessarily whatever someone else's version of success might be, or even my own success might be. It's still very comfortable. So getting out of that discomfort is quite scary.
yeah,
Yeah.
it
But
is.
but I mean, it's just fascinating to hear your views and your approach on things when it comes to the wider kind of business of board games. How do you think, like, from your vantage point, what elements are positive that you've seen recently, maybe, or and what developments aren't maybe as positive? Because I feel like you're a lot of designers that I talk to, they might be board game players, but they are not necessarily board game like fanatics. They
Yeah.
cannot read off a whole bunch of they're designing board games, but they're not necessarily playing them at the level that people who are passionate about the hobby are. And so, like, and I'm not saying you're a fanatic. I'm just saying you have a much keener insight as someone who is both an active consumer and contributor. In the wider board game space, what do you see as either positive or negative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I got into board games relatively late in my life, right? Like 2017 was when I started to think about board games as hobby board games as more than just Monopoly, sorry, life, blah, blah, blah. And to just kind of dip my toe into this stuff. And there's my own journey was like, and I tried this. I tried Clank, and I enjoyed Clank, and I played it with my kids, and so if I enjoyed Clank, well, what's next? And then there's this kind of popcorn. You can't just have one, kind of mentality where it's like you're looking for the next thing, and folks who have a kind of I don't want to use the phrase addictive personality. Let's say that they can that they can get
They enjoy
more
rabbit
focused.
holes.
They enjoy rabbit holes, and they get more engaged with the acquisition of more and more games, and then it begins to outstrip your time physically to be able to actually play those games. And then for most people who are involved, who are like multiplayer gamers, if you're like the most passionate person in the group and everybody else is just kind of casual, and it's like, yeah, that was a cool game, maybe I'll try another one next month, you know what I mean? Like then it becomes frustrating. It's like, because you want to feed this game monster in your belly, but there's nobody around you who kind of matches your energy. Kudos and fortune, if you find a group that like match your energy and match your what you focus on, the types of games you like to play. That's amazing. It's an amazing situation for you. Hang on to that. I hope it doesn't fall into, certain reasons why board game groups fall apart. Because I've been there, right? Like I didn't start out as a solo gamer. I started out as a multiplayer gamer playing with my kids, and then my kids all kind of grew up and moved away, and then my wife isn't into it. My wife will sometimes say, like, on my birthday, it's like, okay, for your birthday, something special, I will agree to play a board game with you.
Deign
It's
to
like,
your level.
I know, and it's like I'm like, no, don't, I don't want your charity. And plus, what game are we going to play? Like something super light? Like, you won't even play Lost Ruins of Arnak with me? So so there's that. It's like, I don't need that. If that's all it's going to be, then I don't want it. Whatever. Yeah, but it's like, so then I became a solo gamer. And also that I had a couple of not great experiences with like a outside board game night where we were in this group that they really like confrontational games with a lot of like, negotiation and backstabbing and conflict and area control and the type, right? And I'm not that. I've never been that. I like lots of theme, but I realize I don't like area control. I don't like people in your face. I'm a introvert at heart. And so whenever I get into a social situation or a game situation where people are like trying to get in my face, I get extremely uncomfortable. And so I stopped going. I stopped going to game nights, but I still wanted to play board games. So I'm like, oh, well, there's solo board gaming, as it turns out, and all this stuff. So I got involved in that, and then that became the engine. And then there was one point where I was like buying 15 or more games a month. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And if you're like inside
Passionate.
of the, well, yeah. I mean, it was bad for me. It was bad for my wallet. It was bad for me. If you're inside of this, like, board game military industrial complex, or you're inside that bubble, then, it becomes like, oh, this game, or interesting game, popping up. It's all over you're on BGG and you're looking at the hotness. Like, oh, look at that, blah, blah, blah. That's on my list. I'm adding to my list. We're posting our lists online. Here's my top 9. And then there's never like a point where you step outside of yourself and it's like, how can you have a top 9 games that you want? Like most people can't even name one. You know what I mean? And so that leads me to this point where it's like, there's an element, and I don't know how widespread it is, but I've certainly been there myself, where it's like part of the success of and the kind of resurgence of interest in board games now kind of relies upon a bunch of people like that who, and then before they know it, they've got 400, 500, 600, 700. I was on Board Game Revolution community the other day, and then one guy posted and he goes, I have 1,100 games, but I still want the next one. What's the next one that you think I should buy? And I'm just like, okay, we have to, at some point, we have to acknowledge that we have a problem. You know what I mean? But that's also kind of like, but board gaming, the industry needs people like that to keep on buying games. More games than you get to a physical point where there's more games than you could ever conceivably play in your lifetime. But you have
collecting
those
board
boxes.
games. Yeah, collecting board games and playing board games, two different hobbies.
That's what people say, and whenever I see that or hear that, I think to myself, oh yeah, that's kind of you justifying your,
Oh, I totally get it. I'm just saying, just in terms of how people I think about it, maybe is they're thinking, oh, I must have that versus, oh yeah, I'll play it at some point. The immediate dopamine hit has been satisfied, which is a bit weird.
And believe me, I don't want to sound or come off as holier than thou. Like I'm.
Oh no,
you can see you're just seeing a small portion of the like almost 500 boxes that I've personally acquired. Yeah. In
but
fact,
it's not 1,000. It's only 500.
That's right. See, so I can double up. No, but like last April we moved to this place that we're living in now, and this place has less storage space than the place we were living in. So no joke, I've got these games in my office that are like all over the walls here, off camera. And then this closet is full, like top and bottom, and then my son's closet in the other room is full. And because he's off to school, you know what I mean? And then there's a part of me that's like, oh, once he, graduates from college and he doesn't have to come home anymore, I can take over. I can do a whole other room. You know what I mean? Which is
the epitome of area control. There you go.
That's awesome. Oh, game idea. I got to write that down. Deposit all game designers have their notes app with like hundreds and hundreds of game ideas. Just write them down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah,
absolutely.
So that's one of my thoughts about like where the industry is now and kind of benefiting from folks who look at collecting as a separate hobby from playing. And then the other thing is, like, again, this is, crowdfunding, right? And like, people saying, well, crowdfunding of board games and really crowdfunding of anything, it's kind of the original spirit, right? The original spirit of Kickstarter was to, help indie people to kind of like get funding for an idea of theirs that otherwise wouldn't have gotten funding, and then they can bring it to light, right? But then that just becomes like this for larger companies that don't really need that Kickstart. It becomes like a pre-order system, right? Yeah. And then you've got it's like the folks who are like
hype machine,
and it works great. That's for a number of companies that I won't mention here, But then like like the topic that like pops up on social media, board game social media. Was like, oh, the creators of the Kickstarter, they vanished for 3 months, and then there was no updates, and we're all pissed off, and this and that, and I'm pulling my fund in my pledge, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, everybody needs to calm down. That's my kind of feeling about that when I read stuff like that. Like, and I've always had the kind of stance when I used to back more Kickstarters. I rarely back Kickstarters, but I don't get credit. I do not get credit from my wife for how much fewer
Restraint.
Kickstarters I back. She'll still mention, oh, what was this in the Kickstarter? I'm like, I threw $5 because I really believed in this creator. It's anyway. I don't get any credit for it, but
You're not getting anything. You don't understand my restraint.
but like historically, I've always been like, okay, this is money, and I like that idea, and I'm willing to lose this money. Boom. So I give it to you, and I don't even read your updates. And then a year and a half later, it shows up. Nice surprise. I even forgot about it. That's great. Like I've never been the type to like hyper focus on updates. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's another thing that's top of mind for me right now in this state of the industry.
Yeah, interesting. In terms of thinking about how games have crept into your life, I know that you started this in, you said 2017, 2018, and you talked about like the challenges of the pandemic, and in general, you've talked a bit before about burnout and how you're dealing with it. So how does that come into, how do games come into that?
Yeah. So I'm a solo gamer now, primarily, right? Except for, the holidays where I'll bring 10 or so games, a dozen games to relative's house in a different state, and then over the holidays we'll play some games. And by the way, like I think nothing about bringing a dozen games to
yeah,
it's like,
makes sense.
Most people are like, no, 2 or 3 boxes. Anyway, most
I
sane
don't
people
bring the one that we want.
I know. I have to have a good representation of all the different mechanisms. So burnout is real for me. Like, the years 2023, 2024 have been very hard for me as a solo gamer because, and I think this was a trend that already like kind of started during the pandemic and then just kind of persisted, where it's like, it's harder for me to focus. It's harder for me to just sit down, read rules. I've always had it ironic because I'm an instructional designer and I write rules and I write technical manuals and I write technical training and I write, for a living. But as somebody, I've always had a hard time sitting down and reading a rule book and then, having the patience to learn. And then it just got like 10 times worse during the pandemic. So I find it very, very difficult to sit down and focus and read a rule book and study a rule book and then learn how to play a game. And then people always say, well, watch a video. Sure. But I mean, like, we all learn and consume things in different ways, and videos have their own challenges for me. So long story short, it's a big level of effort for me to even learn a game. And then you're a solo gamer, so then you're like, okay, then I have to set up the game. And for a lot of these like more complex solo games, that's a pretty big undertaking. You're going to set up the whole thing. It takes your whole table, great. And then you have to then play the game. And then you kind of get into this calculus where it's like, well, I invested all this time studying the game, setting up the game. I have to have it on my table and play it enough times to justify all that effort. The what is that? The sunken cost fallacy. But even just the act of just sitting there, and then so I just get bored sometimes. My attention wanders, and I'm like, I could be sitting here thinking about how to move this worker and optimize this. Oh, Netflix. You know what I mean? It's like, man. So, and that challenge has become more and more pronounced as time has gone on. So I haven't really sat down to play a game in months, legitimately. And I couldn't, as I sit here, I couldn't tell you the last game I played. But I still, I still mentor the print and play community, and I still, I up until recently, I had a game design, a work in progress in the current solo print and play contest. I withdrew it last month because my work has gotten pretty busy. So I still feel like I'm connected to the gaming world, just not currently as a player. So burnout is maybe the wrong word for it in my case, but more like just, you know,
Bandwidth.
bandwidth and lack of attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lack of ability to focus.
That's
So yeah, it's a
totally
daily
get it.
struggle.
So the most recent game that you've been working on is Do Not Go Gentle.
That was
Is
my
that
2023 game design. I finished that
right?
design.
You
Yeah.
finished it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the one
It's on.
it's available on BGG.
Yes, it is.
So how did you approach Do Not Go Gentle differently? Now that that's been your most recent game design that you've put out there. Was the discovery of different types of mechanics did that affect the way that you looked at Do Not Go Gentle when it came to thinking about some more of the fundamentals of that, like randomness versus calculation of the Euro games versus the Ameri games? I don't say Ameritrash.
Yeah. Me neither. I've gotten in trouble for saying that term, even though in my head I'm like, yeah, that was the term.
That's the name.
Yeah.
That's the name.
Yes, absolutely. To everything that you set up your question with, I have become. I've played from my first game design, The Cleaner, to Do Not Go Gentle. I've played many more games. I've become aware of many more mechanisms. I became more of a medium weight Euro style gamer along the way, and so when it came time last year for me to think about, like, okay, I feel like I wanna submit a game design to this contest. And even though I'd never designed a Euro game, I'd never designed a worker placement game, but in my conceit, I'm like, well, I've played enough, and I have enough unplayed Euro games around me here in this room. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring. And so, like, my thoughts around the initial game design were, what spin can I personally think about and put on the worker placement mechanism to kind of make it a little bit more fresh, or give people something they haven't seen before? And so the first idea I had was so Do Not Go Gentle is a post-apocalyptic survival game, and basically you are this small band of survivors, and you're in the outskirts of a city. And we are it's not a zombie apocalypse, but it is global warming, I think, was my boogeyman. Global warming happened, like 5 million people died. The rest of us who are surviving on the just hard scrabble, like, edge of our like lives all the time. And there, you've just managed to build a small settlement with walls, with fortified at the edge of a city, and it's a game of 6 rounds, and then at the end of each round, the marauders are going to come and try to take your stuff, try to take your resources, very few resources, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this element of, like, base building. There's this element of resource production, because you have this little 3x3 grid where, like, you have a basic farm, and then you have a basic workshop, and then you have a basic weapon shop. Those are the 3 structures you start with. And then you have 3, survivors who are your workers, and they have no special abilities. And then there's a secondary board which represents the ruined city. And each round, you have the option to place a worker there, and then they go and they try to scavenge for stuff in the ruined city. And the incentive for you to scavenge in the ruined city is because you might find other survivors. And that's important because other survivors give you an additional worker, which then allows you to do more things. Right. So I, in my head, I'm like, this is cool. This is working. I like this idea. I really like this, this ability this chance of getting a different worker. But there's a risk. Like, the more you scavenge, the more that you can, all of a sudden get ambushed, and then the survivor that you sent out there gets killed. And then not only do you not have an additional worker, you're down 1 worker, right? So there's, like, this big kind of risk reward calculation there. And I thought, in my head, I'm just like, well, because, like, as a designer, you're like, well, never give them anything for free. Number 1, always make them work for it. And so it matters. tougher, more challenging is more interesting, is more fun. Like that's a basic kind of like thing that's going on in my head, and so I'm trying to, how do I make that real in the game design? Um, so the spin that I wanted to put on worker placement was this idea of half effort, right? Where on your tiles of your like your workshop, your farm, and your weapon shop, you've got these spaces, and you can place your worker on the space and then get two of that thing, like two food or two gun or two barricades, right? Barricades protect against marauders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then that worker is stuck there in that place where you put them. You can't move them again. Or you could place them in the half effort space. And in the half effort space, they only get one of that thing. They only produce one of that thing, but after that action, you can then move them to another spot for for defense, right? Because you know that at the end of the round, the marauders are going to come, but you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know whether they're coming from north, south, west, or east. So then, um, being able to move that worker to a different spot to help defend, I thought was a nice calculation of like, well, do I put them here the full effort and get two of the thing, or do I only get one of the thing, but then I can move them again? You know, so like again, I was always kind of in my mind balancing like this risk reward, and then I was also kind of playing with the idea of, it's like you have games with hidden information, then you have games with full information, and I was like, well, what's the middle ground? Like I want imperfect information, right? So my idea with there was like, because you have these cards that on the front of it, it tells you where the marauder's coming from, because each of the spaces in the are numbered, right? And so it like gives you coordinates of where they'll enter first, and therefore which of your buildings are they going to attack first, right? But on the back of it, on the card, I had like a little bit of dialogue that kind of was supposed to, kind of represent you got information, you got a bit of information from someone, a passing merchant, an old hermit, whatever, like, and that would add to the theme, right? Of like building this world of this post-apocalyptic world, but also they're giving you like, like a hint of where they, not exactly where the marauders are going to come, but a hint of where the group is massing, and therefore kind of where they might be, what side they might be coming from. So those were my key ideas as I was going in. It's like imperfect information, half effort, and then the risk reward of going out scavenging. So those are some of my key design elements. And after the work, after I actually finished it and actually play tested it, and then I had five other crazy people actually build it and play test it as well, because it's a massive print and play project. But everyone who managed to play it enjoyed it, and they said it was hard. They said it was this, or so it was. But so it was, to me, in my head, it was a successful design in that it achieved my goals, what I wanted to get out of it, and it was the game that I wanted to see out and put out into the world, and it's there now, and people can download it and people can check it out, as long as they're willing to build this gigantic print and play, project. Yeah.
Wow. And so you say that your most recent one you pulled from the most recent competition, but
Yeah, the 2024, yeah.
Are you working? Do you have? I mean, obviously, you probably have a notebook full of ideas. Do you know which one might be next at some point?
I really like to finish this current one that I'm doing, which is called Veil of Shadows. So I really love noir. Just hard-boiled detective in the dark city, and then there's these just like array of like evil forces around them, the corrupt cop, the corrupt politician, the femme fatale, the like all of these like, almost cliche trappings of the noir, like 1930s, 1940s, hard-boiled detective genre. And I want to have there's very few games that A, use that theme, and B, use that theme well, in my conceit. So, and I know all of them, and I've been disappointed by all of them at one point or another. So I'm like, and I historically love deck building games. I have over 20. in these boxes around me. And so I'm like, okay, I want to build a noir deck building game with a board that has kind of a movement element. So all very similar to the most similar game that I can think of is Tyrants of the Underdark, if you've ever heard of it.
No.
Where it's like it's deck building, but there's also locations on a board, and then there's a movement element, and then you encounter adversaries and opposition on the board itself, and then you're heading toward the boss's lair. And then my idea was that I'd have 4 different bosses, and then each boss would have like 3 different minions or underbosses. And so you would encounter each minion on the way to the final boss. And then there'd be like a, big villain soliloquy, that you'd have to like, So again, there's that blend of theme, but also, kind of like how do I blend traditional kind of deck building elements with this board movement kind of thing. Almost like Eldritch Horror, if you've ever played that game, where it's like you move to different places and then you encounter different things, and then either you win or you lose, and then you get stuff. So these are kind of, again, I was designing the kind of game that I wanted to see in the world that I don't think has been done yet. And at the end of the day, I've kind of landed on that, where like earlier on, I would design things for like other people. It's like I hope they think this is cool, blah, blah, blah. And then as further and further down the road, I've just kind of like, what? I'm just going to design something that I think is cool. And then if other people think is cool, great. But if nobody thinks it's cool, I still design something that I think is cool. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I want to finish that. I'm like 90% done, But I just couldn't. I didn't think I could get it done within the contest time frame.
Yeah, which is fair. That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I love noir, and I agree with you. There's not enough interesting noir stuff out there.
Awesome.
So yeah, I will definitely be on the lookout for it.
Oh, thank you.
Martin, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience and geek out a little bit about Lost Ruins of Arnak with me today. If anybody out there would like to find out more about Martin's Print and Play Hideaway Facebook group, you can find it on Facebook by searching for PNP Hideaway. And you can also find Martin's YouTube channel with the handle PNP Hideaway. We'll have those links plus links to the Print and Play Crafting Geek List on BGG and the Print and Play subreddit in the description as well. Martin, thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you, Robert. It was my pleasure.